Good evening everybody and welcome to the August We Are Change Leeds meeting, and tonight's topic is how to raise your vibration. So please welcome back Claire, or Cosmic Claire, who's going to give this evening's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for that. In fact, when I was putting the blurb together for this, I decided I would actually change the title slightly to Evolving Your Vibration. To evolve your vibration and thereby to become more effective. Because I think one of the things that we often find in the world is that we try to do certain things, we find certain information, we try to do things, and they never really seem to make much difference to the world that we live in. And we're often left thinking, why is it that some people have big influence on the world and things change and their life progresses, and for others it doesn't? Now, there's one big section of that that I'll bypass completely, which of course is the world of corporate deceit, lies, corruption and exploitation. That is one way to have a prosperous material life, but it's not one which I'm going to advocate, because that kind of reality always has pitfalls and karma some way down the line. What I'm more interested in is looking about how to approach the world in such a way as to make a difference, but through making permanent and positive change within yourself, so that you may recall from the blurb on the page about it, I took the quotation from ancient Greece, from Archimedes. If I had a fulcrum, I could move the world. I don't know if that's a phrase a term that people have heard before. It's quite an important statement in the history of science. And I remember it from when I was about 10, seeing this book about mathematics, and I saw a picture of Archimedes with this lever and a little fulcrum in the world, and it's saying if you had a fulcrum you could move the world. And what is a fulcrum? A fulcrum is a fixed point around a bit which things can move or be levered. And if we think of ourselves as becoming that fixed point, rather than the world outside being the fixed point, then our whole involvement with cause and effect changes. One of the big differences I want to draw attention to is that while the material world works in the ways of Newtonian physics, in local action, that's why when we think of a fulcrum, you're thinking about making an effect on the world from some kind of action. But when it comes to the world of consciousness, you have, it's far more like quantum physics, whereby things can be a little bit less deterministic. And what we should remember is that the world that we've been brought up in is a world of control and prediction. you go to school. By the time you're 15, you've been given some sort of careers advice, you're shuffled into some kind of training probably, and even the people who do well, they go on and they find their job in academia or the civil service or less reputable areas such as government. But what's the really important thing is to be able to look at the world in a way where you are not constrained by the prediction and the predictability and the control of the tram lines of your conditioning. And this is where I want to engage with the world of, we are change. We are interested in changing the world. We're interested in changing the politics. We're interested in making people more aware so that the world can change. But so often we just get trapped in the fighting the effects. If you think about going back 3 years ago now, when the political awakening took one big step forward at the time of the Occupy movement, which had its ups and downs and everything, but there was definitely something that was going on there. But I remember when I was involved in it, it was all very well drawing attention to the fact that certain corporations were evading billions of pounds worth of responsibilities, which could be paying for welfare for the less well off and so forth. But looking back on that, I realise now that it was a time where you were looking at things that had already happened. I can think of a number of occasions in my life where whatever I wanted, it was not of any efficacy because there was already a fait accompli. Right, so we have the world now where the politics is very largely, it's about the people are in control. They have the control of causality. And they hope that the people, the sheeple, will remain in a state of responding, like you can just imagine. The people in Gaza, what can they do? Virtually all they can do is run, if they're lucky. Now, getting out of the frame of mind where you only ever respond to effects is actually quite a difficult task, because we have been programmed all our lives that this is the way things happen, this is the way things happen. I cannot count the number of times I've heard people say, oh, that's a hopeless cause, or that would never work, or what can you do about it, the game's rigged, blah, 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 blah. And working within the game of cause and effect that the people at the top want to run, this is how it works. The likes of you and I on the street make very little difference, because all we're doing is fighting against the effects which are handed down to us in terms of largely economics, social control, so forth. So, what I'm suggesting is that we have to get out of this mindset, and we have to get into what I might refer to as being like a quantum mindset rather than a Newtonian mindset, so that we are, as in quantum physics, you have particles which can split and can go into two different timelines. I think people here are probably familiar with the term timelines. Now, this is where it gets the really, I think this is really one of the most important things, is that human beings are largely creatures of habit. We we get up, go to work, blah, blah, blah. And life is very much a predictable sequence of events where everything is planned. Or not so much planned, just inevitable, because that's the way that society has been set up. That's how we've been inducted into society. And one of the chief thing that people have not been taught to do, and this I'm sure is deliberate, is knowing how to make choices and knowing how to make decisions, because decisions are what matter. Because if you're on a pathway, you're following a particular morphic field, this is the way your life has been, unless there's any major inputs from outside, this is how your life will continue. But taking decisions which change things puts you onto a different pathway in reality. And this is such a kind of simple and obvious thing, but nonetheless it's a crucial and fundamental thing about the way our reality is set up, which is quite obviously kept away from the minds of people. Just keep them watching the football, watch the latest blockbuster, and so on and so forth. When people say, well, you can't change things, this is the way it is, it's always going to be. And people are discouraged from taking choices. What is choices? Choices are freedom. You can say, well, I could do this, I could do that. I could carry on going the same way I've always been going, the way that my friends go, the way that my family go, the way that my social class, the place where I live, all those things. How that all carries on, or else I can say, well, I'm not comfortable with this, so I want to find some more expressive form of reality. Now, I'm not going to be talking precisely about how you can beat the banking system. That's the sort of stuff other people talk about in other talks. And all that's kind of good information, but I think it's what I would like to add to that is that it's important to be coming from a place in yourself where you're not trying to just beat it and get the bastards, but where you're actually changing the way that you engage with this reality. And that's what it says at the top of the blurb on the front page of the About Us section of the group. It says, be the change that you want to see in the world. So I was listening to an audio blogger I listen to sometimes called Neil Kramer, who I find extremely insightful. And oh, I'm sorry, I lost my thread there. Well, I'll just go back to where I was before. Basically, this changing our reality through taking choices. Neil Kramer will pop back into my mind. I should probably be using my own thoughts and not relying on somebody else's. So it's about establishing your own autonomy and freedom and getting outside of the mindset where everything is hopeless, everything is fixed. This is what in psychology is called the victim mindset. You see yourself as a victim of everything. It's like, I can't do anything about that because that person did this to me, that thing happened to me, I'm constrained by this, I'm boxed in. And if you see the world in those terms, then that is largely how you will tend to engage with it. But simply saying, oh, I'm free, I'm not going to engage in this, and then kind of thrashing about, is also not tremendously helpful. Unless you're really coming from a point of central reality within yourself. So this is where when I talk about evolving your vibration, now we all have vibrational realities within ourselves, our whole etheric energy field. You will have seen things like Kirlian photographs and much more modern stuff. And our brain patterns as well are very much like, you're probably familiar with cymatics. People here familiar with the word cymatics? Cymatics is the where you can have like a metal plate with sand on it, and if it's held rigid up to the centre and you bow it or apply a vibration to it, certain frequencies will create these patterns on there. So you can see that random disorganised matter such as sand can be organised into beautiful patterns, and this is what we need to apply to ourselves, because if you are in a state of disempowerment and seeing yourself as a victim, always responding, always on the back foot, always having to deal with effects, never creating your own causes, never creating your own reality, then your brainwave patterns will be in a state of conflict, harmony, chaos and confusion, because there will be different impulses going in one direction or in another. There's the, oh, I'd like to do this, but there's, I'm afraid of that, and what would somebody think, and can I afford it? Rather than having a pure kind of resonance of desire within you, positive desire, and not being kind of jammed, like they used to, back in the 60s and 70s, Radio Moscow and the Voice of America used to jam each other. You may remember that, those of you who are old enough. And really, in many ways, there's a lot of that going on from all sorts of things. In fact, I know there's people in this group that I've had discussions about this thing called the hum, for instance. I mean, this is just slightly peripheral to my talk tonight, but there are neurological effects from, obviously we know about the Wi-Fi soup, and they distort and disturb the brainwave patterns. But so what I'm suggesting is that joining up both ancient wisdom teachings and modern science, it's possible to understand how we can effectively reprogram ourselves, or gain, perhaps I should say, gain access to the inner core vibrations that we have. David Icke many years ago called this the truth vibrations. We have them in ourselves as well as in the universe, and there are many ways. Obviously, we're all familiar with things like meditation and There are other things like, some people here will know I'm very into brainwave entrainment, which can get you into deep brainwave patterns where you can detach yourself or get into hypnotic states, and these, when they're joined with things like guided meditations, you can detach yourself from the programming. If you understand what it is, if you understand that there is the programming, you understand that we have all got stuck in attachments to the things that have held us back, the things that have maybe caused us pain in the past, but which are now just engrams which just go round and round and round. There's a line from a Bob Dylan song, which I love, which goes, "I just keep recycling the same old thoughts." And I thought, that is just such a good way of describing the space that most of us are in most of the time. So yes, there are also things you can do in your daily life, because obviously you have things like these things like meditation, brainwave entrainment, guided fantasy, hypnotic therapies. These are all great, but it's also good to have things in your daily life which can be practice, because one of the most important things I've realised over the years is that it's really important to have some kind of what is called practice, which could be some kind of mindfulness or some kind of meditation, something to get you closer to the centre of your being. Oh, this is interesting. I love Simplicities when this happened. This is the old Rolling Stones song, "Don't Play With Me Because You're Playing With Fire." And kind of in a way, it is a little bit like that, getting into your inner world, because our inner world is, there's a true core vibration in there, but it's also beset around with all sorts of kinds of defences, particularly our own shadows, which are our own fears of what could happen, our own fear of our own power, fear of failure, fear of success, all these, what will happen if that, what will happen if that, I know what will happen if I just stay boring and I'll just stay on this path and I won't get into all these. But fire is dangerous, but it is also powerful, and it is what transformed humans, if we'll stay with the conventional evolutionary model. And so the idea is to find these things and then evolve them, because then we can fan those flames within ourselves and become more powerful. Now, I'm just thinking this is probably a good point at which to diverge into. When I say about practice, I've got a little thing here. I'm still, a few years ago, I was a bit of a self-development junkie on a lot of sites on the internet, until I got the grasp of what they were all getting at. And some of them are still very stark, unfortunately, in just material acquisition, and I still get the odd email saying, wouldn't you really like that red Maserati? And I think it's kind of a little bit like 20th century, that, because what I'm really interested in is using spiritual and psychological evolution to have a positive impact on the world, which will thereby have an impact on my life and all those around me. This is what in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, which I know best, what they call compassion towards all sentient beings, and there's a very good video of the Dalai Lama talking to a psychologist called Dr. Peter Ekman, Paul Ekman I should say, on the internet at the moment. And so how do we engage in daily practice using practicing compassion and thereby actually strengthening our own being? Because this is something Neil Kramer was talking about the other day when I was listening to him, which is about channeling. Now, channeling is a very, very fraught subject, but and there's a lot of error and charlatanry out there about channeling. But what I think channeling is about really is actually channeling yourself, finding your own real inner core vibrational pathway, who you are, and bringing it into reality. Now, manifestation is one way of looking at it, but of course when we hear a lot about manifestation, it's usually about acquisition. Manifest the kind of life that you want to, manifest yourself a house, manifest yourself this, manifest yourself that. But actually, manifesting yourself is really what it's about. And there's a lovely allusion made in the Dune novels, which is that when a living system is exercised, it becomes stronger. But when a mechanical system is exercised, it wears out. And what we are up against is that the system we are up against is a machine. It is ruthless, but it's insensitive and it's completely lacking in empathy. And it's also, I mean, this is, again, without getting into wider questions, for instance, this is one reason why the Nazis did not win the Second World War. I know there are a lot of big, larger issues, which I won't get into about that, but, for instance, when you think about Bletchley Heath and how that was involved, basically, the more intelligent you are, the intelligence wins in the end because it thinks about things more subtly and in a more advanced way than the brutal machine does, because the brutal machine is just interested in clomp, 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 wiping out, and it doesn't see the little cracks, it doesn't see the little opportunities, it doesn't see the little bits of creativeness, and that's where we come in. We can't beat the machine, the cabal, the New World Order. We can't beat that on its own terms mechanically, because that is the world of effects. We need to step back from this and start creating our own realities from the level of causation, so that we are being creative in our own lives and our own practice. So I said, what are these? So I said a minute ago that I was going to be talking about there was some little exercises that I did see on these emails that I get. Sometimes there's little good snippets in there, and I think, oh yes, I think I'll pick that one up, because these people there who are kind of selling these, you know, material manifestation programs and stuff, they've got ideas in there and they kind of know how it works. They just kind of get a bit bogged down in too much materialism. But this example, which I thought was a good one, it said, this is practice. So it said there are three things beginning with C that you should not do, and the three things beginning with G that you should do to increase your power of manifestation and to increase the channeling of what I would call channeling of your spirit, so that your daily life is practice. So it's not just sitting in a chair and learning how to be calm and peaceful, but you're actually literally manifesting the spirit in the world. So what are these? Well, I don't know if anybody would like to throw any out from the audience. 3 C's that it is not advisable to do for your evolution, or any of the 3 G's which are absolutely essential for your evolution. Now, the G's are good ones to go for, which people often find. There's a kind of well understood one now, which is kind of like a meme that's going throughout the internet, and it actually is something which creates bonding and human empathy, and it's a really, really good one, and it's absolutely something to practice in your daily life whenever you get the opportunity. So, has anybody got any of the C's that you shouldn't do, or some of the G's that you should do?
G, gratitude.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the number one. It keeps coming up in all these internet self-improvement programs I started getting into about 4 or 5 years ago, and gratitude is absolutely the top number one thing, because as I believe anyway, the universe is a conscious being that we are part of and that we are interacting with. So like the yin and the yang, we are the yin, the little individual, the yang is the great cosmos, but they interact. So I would see this when I was working in psychiatric nursing. You would see people who would, it'd be really, really quite sad and distressing, but people who had been kind of like colonized by so much pain that they just had all this kind of negativity going around. They'd be swearing and cursing, and it was like they'd kind of got possessed by negative energy. But the alternative to that is to actually, and I don't mean to kind of like promote any kind of dogmatic religious systems, because but the main problem with those are the autocratic hierarchies which tell people how these things should be. It's one thing to follow the teachings of Jesus, it's another thing to follow the way that the Pope says you should, and which is a complete misinterpretation of many of the things that Jesus might have said. But to use some of that old style language, when you're expressing gratitude, you are, as they might say, blessing the world. You are blessing the person. Some of you were at my talk at the Swarthmore a couple of years ago, when I used the example about bus drivers. This is my favourite one, because bus drivers see so many people every day, and quite often these days people usually thank them as they're going up. There's usually a chorus of people saying thank you, but often at the beginning when people get on, you can sense if the bus driver's a bit, he's had a bad day, got stuck in traffic, somebody was rude to him, honked the horn, whatever. So this is an exercise of gratitude. So it's not just saying thank you at the end, but actually this is something I came across some years ago. In Hindu teaching, they have something called darshan. Darshan, you may have come across. I see some heads nodding. Darshan is gaze of blessing. And I'm not particularly into gurus. In fact, I think anybody can do it, because what it's about is, it's like, the term namaste. Namaste means I respect, I recognise and respect the God being within you, the spirit within you. So this is what darshan is about, really, and this is what gratitude is about. It's actually reinforcing that spirit bond. Well, I'm just wondering if anybody, I don't want to get too stuck on this because there are some of the other things. Anybody got any of the C's? Yeah, I think that's one. Well, I have to say, I did not pay the $49 and get the course, because I've done so many of these in the past. I thought, I'll just have fun with myself guessing what these C's and what these G's are. So I can't guarantee that they're absolutely what she was going to say in her thing, but they're ones that I certainly think have their own power. And I think that particularly that's a good one, because it focuses on those things which you don't like. So I'm not saying that you should never complain about anything, because obviously there are things that it is worth complaining about. It's things worth putting your energy into. But maybe it should be something like, don't complain unless you can know what to do about something. Because it can become a kind of habit of mind. All these things are basically, it's all about habits of mind. There's one that I'm very sure of with the C's, which is control.
I was just about to say it.
Yeah. Because that is exactly what the enemy do. The enemy like to have everything controlled. Certainly anybody who's been watching over the last decade or so notices that the powers that like to think they are like to be in control. And it's so important that we step outside of the paradigms because that they set up for us. If we are always only responding in their paradigm, they control us, we try to control other people, you pass it down the line and the office boy kicks the cat, you know, that kind of thing. But also controlling things means that you are preventing the flow of natural abundance. Now when people say, oh, where's I hear about this natural abundance, where is it? I'm broke. And it's real. If you're only focusing on acquiring a flow of money, then that's probably missing the point, because the way I see certainly about natural abundance is being that the universe has an infinite stream of possibilities and opportunities which come towards us. And it's this state of mind, the attitude of mind, which brings us into whether we can harvest those opportunities that the universe feeds towards us. And then, so if you're on a kind of feedback loop with the universe where you're appreciating the universe is feeding you opportunities, then it is quite surprising what synchronistic feedback loops can be created. I'm sure probably everybody here at some point or another has gone to a festival or an event or something, and then they get into the Dow zone, the synchronicity net, and suddenly this is happening and that's happening, and they're meeting somebody, and then it's God, and then suddenly I was talking to so-and-so, and all these things happened. And that wouldn't have happened if you had stayed controlling in kind of little me, and I don't want to do this, and I'm a bit frightened, and I'm, he's a grumpy old blah, 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 blah. Downhill vibration. The other C is just simply can't. Now again, that's one I think that certainly, I wouldn't suggest to anybody, jump out of a 10th story window, because it's ludicrous to say that you can't fly. There's a saying that going around the self-developed community, which I find dodgy, which says, what would you do if you couldn't fail? Well, I think that's kind of taking it a little bit too far. I think we have to stay within the realms of what is actually physically possible. I mean, what I'm interested in is breaking down those boundaries of self-limitation. I'm not saying that, oh yeah, you can fly out of a 10th story window if you believe strongly enough, because I've seen plenty of this stuff in the world of the law of attraction and realised that there is a lot of distraction in this world. But, yeah, so can't, I think, is one not to do when you're thinking in terms of your own self-limitation. But we've still got a couple more G's to go. And I've got 3 more actually, but they kind of repeat. But giving was one that I was going to, yeah.
Grateful.
Yeah, we've had grateful, gratitude, grateful.
Godliness?
Grow. Goodness. Good.
Yes, well I would say these, except that how do you define goodness, or how do you, what you want to do? You want to do something that will make you grow, rather than say, I'm going to grow. If you say, oh, I'm going to grow, well, it's like, well, how do I do it? Whereas if you're expressing gratitude, that energy is flowing through you, and so you are growing. So what are the things that can help you to grow, rather than that being a goal, certainly, that we would aim for? Well, I would say yes, giving. I think the one that I think is kind of the one that kind of doubles with that a little bit, I think, is generosity. I think that's a little bit similar. And then the other one that I had, which is they all kind of overlap a little bit, but I was thinking of gladness. Which again is a little bit like gratitude, but it's more like a state that just emanates without actually any cause. I mean, gratitude is sort of towards something or somebody. I'm grateful for that. So that's an attitude of gratitude. Then generosity is a giving, whereas gladness is more just like
contentment,
a state within yourself, you know. Without any particular focus or cause, which is kind of self-generated, which would just come from achieving quietness within. I would suggest. Yeah, so the way that I would see this approach that I'm talking about tonight is that it's about realizing that learning and growth are ongoing things that occur within ourselves. We shouldn't just see our path in terms of either overthrowing, exposing the cabal, achieving personal wealth, whatever that might mean, but as actually seeing ourselves as the conduits for creating a new reality, co-creating. I think probably people hear the term co-creating quite a lot on the internet these days, and I think this is important because there was too much a little while back, and I think it's probably still out there, where people are suggesting that you entirely create your own reality. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't create the Packhorse. You know, I didn't create Leeds. They are fait accomplis which impact upon my reality. They're fait accomplis that I'm quite happy to accept. But in our day-to-day lives, the same thing goes on a smaller scale, whereby people interact with us and we have to come back to them. So how do we come back to people? Do we try to reinforce a positive build-up of reinforcement? Or do we get into a negative, opposing reality, which of course is about fighting effects rather than creating new causes? So you may have heard the term the primum mobile. It's a word. It's a term used to describe God. In it's Latin, meaning first mover. This is a term which is I think used by the Roman Catholic Church to describe God. However, I would say that we all can be prime movers when we create new pathways in our lives by taking decisions which will take us away from the existing tram lines that our lives have been on. And I think I'd say one of the things about the Roman Catholic use of the term primum mobile is that they would suggest by that, I think, that only God up there can be a prime mover and a cause, and we are just, we're just victims working out the effects, and we can't help it because we're born with a blah, 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 blah. Don't want to get into that. Whereas to see ourselves all as fractal fragments, holographic fragments of a divine spirit, then that kind of opens us up to the possibility that we can channel this creativity and create new things by co-creating in interaction with those things that we encounter in our world. And of course we will encounter both negative and positive things. But in the way that we interact, then we can either turn around the negative vibrations, or we can reinforce them and go straight in. I mean, even in conventional, straight, normal, boring academic psychology, it is recognised that positive reinforcement is far more effective than negative reinforcement when it comes to children learning skills, social behaviour, all these things, because you know that you do something right and you get rewards for it. They say, oh, that's good, it works out, and all these positive things, and you go down there. Whereas if a child does something that you don't approve of, it gets punished or disapproved of or whatever, then it creates resentment, create resistances, and that goes down a negative pathway. So in every moment, in every human interaction, we have the opportunity for this mindfulness to make these choices, to make these decisions, to improve things, to feed back gratitude and generosity, to not criticize. I think that was probably one of the C's, wasn't it? Yes, I think possibly. Again, unless it can be done constructively. I think I've kind of found my way through this. Oh yes, so I would say yes that this is not just about some kind of being kind of enslaved to serving others, because it's as much about channeling your own creativity so that your own life becomes richer as a result. Because when you follow these pathways, it's kind of interesting how the universe responds with positive feedbacks. So this would be paths where you get into doing those things that you do for the love of it, and engaging with the world, and finding that it actually, creates a pathway of reward for you. because it needs to be a two-way thing. It's not just about, oh, you know, I've got to serve the universe and I've got to be nice to everybody and what about me, you know, because exploring your own pathway is part of this, and spreading the mutual reinforcement builds the field. You've probably heard the term the field. This is the kind of the world that we all engage in, the consciousness field. So if you're reinforcing a consciousness field which has cooperation, creativity, got some positive C's in here, then we bring it all more together into a shared centre, rather than what the psychopathic exploiters, they're always looking for division and opposition and conflict, because that creates more confusion, which they can take advantage of. So they just want people to be scurrying around in the chaos and debris, because people don't have, you know, control there. But if people are pursuing community and cooperative expressions of their own creativity through using these practices in daily life, then we're actually creating kind of like a damping field whereby people will feel intuitively drawn into it, because you can tell people who are creating the positive, the vibes, the darshan, just intuitively. You know how children can tell, oh, I don't like that man, he's horrible, you know. And even though, you know, to the world, that man wears a suit, blah, 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 you know, you can feel it. So I just wonder if, just to finish off, I don't know whether this is a bit too edgy, but I wonder if people would like to try exploring this gaze of darshan by just looking at the person next to you for just a few seconds, as long as you can manage. If there's anybody isn't comfortable with this, yeah.
I don't know if anyone's interested. I'd just like to say I have actually received darshan
Sure,
from Mother Mira.
Oh yes,
in Germany.
yes.
And it was a really nice, very nice experience.
Yes.
I mean, like yourself, I'm not into gurus either, but that was then, and you know.
Oh
it
yes,
was
yes.
a really
No,
nice
she does seem to be a
experience.
very loving person.
Oh yeah, I can feel
know
it's
of
a
her.
loving vibration
Yes.
sort of emanating from her.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about darshan, as I kind of feel about it, is that once you have experienced it, or if you understand what it is, you can give it yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and you know, just the loving gaze of a mother at her child is darshan.
Yes. Anyone can give healing.
Exactly.
You just have to have the right intention.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. So I was just wondering if this might be an opportunity, because I said on the blurb that there would be a couple of exercises. So we've had the C's and the G's. For those into DNA, I don't know any A's and T's, but I'll see about those. But it just might be a kind of interesting little thing just to do for 15 or 20 seconds, if you can manage that, or you might want to do it for longer.
Laughing.
And,
I used to do it with my brother. We used to play this game where we used to gaze into each other's eyes and we'd fall about laughing.
So you just
we'd see who could go the longest without laughing.
yeah, there's no intention other than to be aware of the other person, and in an appreciative kind of way. Yeah.
I know it's
That was about 10 seconds, I think.
Well, it's interesting actually that it does often end in laughing, because I mean that is.
But laughing is healing,
it's
isn't
quite a
it?
good thing anyway.
I didn't think of that.
Well, there are schools of laughter therapy and laughter therapists these days.
Yes.
I do hope they don't have to be accredited and insured and all these other things, because that would be kind of absurd. Okay, well I'll just wind up there anyway. So if anybody wants to talk about this afterwards, we can talk after the break, but perhaps we could just get a drink now. And,
can I just say,
oh yes.
I was reading the exact same thing that you've just spoke about all over today.
Oh.
Everything.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, everything. Energy goes where energy flows.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, where you put it. And it comes back in the way, the intention that you put into it. So, always smile.
And not look on the bright side of life.
Yeah. I know it kind of sounds a bit simple, but it's actually true.
Well, it should be. It's simple.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
It says now fading.
Great.
Is that right?
Okay, well thank you very much everybody, and now that we've had our break and drinks and everything, I'm just wondering if there's any any subjects, any questions, any topics people have for discussion that they'd like to pick up on what we were talking about before, perhaps?
I think there's been some interesting films that have been kind of along the lines of creating your reality, synchronicity, spirituality, things like What the Bleep.
I haven't seen that.
Which was that's worth a watch if you haven't seen it before. It's kind of awkward to explain, to be honest. It's quite, but it's definitely worth a watch. And then there's obviously things like the Celestine Prophecy, which for me is, it's the sort of thing that you can read and watch again and again, because there's such a strong spiritual message in it about. For me, it's not just about creating your reality and what have you, but it's also, I think, part of keeping your vibration high is kind of going through certain I'm not sure what the word is, but for anyone who has watched the Celestine Prophecy, and it talks about the 10 insights, and each insight I remember reading for the first time, and I thought, wow, there's no way this is a story, if as I understand it, people have lived by those 10 insights. There are people, I think it's probably America more so, they've actually lived their lives through those insights, and and I think through doing that they have acquired skills that they wouldn't have done otherwise unless they'd raised their vibration and maintained it at the same time.
This is what I was talking about when I was saying about practice. Because if you live through practice rather than just being on the receiving end of reality, then you are modifying reality, aren't you? If you're recognising synchronicities when they happen, and it's modifying your consciousness in some way so that you, it changes the way that you behave, you make decisions as a result of it, you think that happened, therefore that gives me that opportunity, so I'll do this, then that is taking you onto a new track of reality, isn't it? Plus also, this is what I want to take you back to. Plus also the most important thing is that you are setting up those structural vibrations within your aura so that that kind of thing is more likely to happen again. Both the external thing, but also your own recognition of it, so that you are now more tuned to be able to receive these things, to be able to see them. Whereas before, you know, you're kind of like, oh, did that happen or did it not, you know. So it's very much about practice. And I mean, one of the things also that comes up in the 11th insight, because the 11th insight is all about maintaining your vibration, and this is what it's about. It's about finding that vibration within yourself and having both learned and acquired the practice of knowing how to perpetuate that vibration rather than just being on the receiving end. I mean, one of the things, I mean, we all love having our spirits raised by speakers that we go to and things like this. But in the end, if we only follow these things, if we only, you know, say, oh, that was a wonderful talk I saw, it made me feel really good. If you're not able to recapture that, or if you're unable to regenerate, I should say, is probably a better word, that within yourself, then you're really, again, still only coming on the effects end of reality rather than being on the causal end. So seeing how you can learn how to perpetuate these vibrations within yourself so that your aura is a means of putting this energy out into the world. And
this will be Ted, sorry about this, Claire, it's Ted.
Okay, right,
Hello?
well, I think we'll have to stop
Hello?
this.
Hi Gwen, hi.
Okay, well, so where were we?
Celestine prophecy.
Yeah.
You're talking about the 11th insight.
Oh yeah, well, this was about, it's, I think that this is really such an important aspect of this whole business, because one of the things that keeps happening in the Celestine prophecy and in the various sequels is that he's getting into this amazing kind of thing that's happening, and he's tuned into some other reality, or some amazing synchronicities happening or something, and then something interferes, and then suddenly the whole thing, it's like a bubble that deflates, and he's going like, oh, what happened to my vibration? Oh, you know, my stomach's gone, I can feel my solar plexus chakra is all kind of open, and what happened? Why couldn't I keep my energy up? And it's because he was focusing on an external thing rather than focusing on an external disharmony rather than focusing on your internal harmony. Another exercise, I mean, we did a couple of exercises, but one exercise you can do, which is really, really good, is just to stop and listen to the ambient sounds and feel your body sitting on the chair and your feet on the floor, listening to the noises around. You know, it's much better, of course, when you can do it in the garden and you can listen to birds or something like that, rather than just hearing a fridge going and air conditioning and the jukebox playing the Rolling Stones downstairs or whatever. But all these things can nonetheless bring you to the moment, because that's another part of the fulcrum I should have said earlier, which is that being in the moment rather than acting from past or present, because the moment, the centre now, is like that immovable fulcrum that because if you're responding to things that happened in the past, if your mind is stuck on this happened, that happened, and you're responding from negative associations in the past, or you're thinking about positive things from the future, you're not where you are now. And being where you are now and not being distracted is really, really important for maintaining that core vibration. And there's all kind of little tricks you can play, like imagining that your solar plexus is circled with a golden ring of light, because that's where, of course, that's where you feel your energy when it goes, isn't it? You feel all butterflies, or feel like, and if you imagine your solar plexus being circled with light, so it's like kind of giving it protection and definition, and then focus on breathing into that, just slowly, then breathing out and following it and being aware of it, then it brings you into your body, it brings you into that moment, so that you are in your centre of experience rather than in the destabilising chaos outside. It's not absolutely foolproof, because I imagine they'd have to try pretty hard if you're in Gaza and all this was coming around you. But nonetheless, this kind of practice means that you have a greater handle on reality, because it's not just about doing this in one moment, it's about practice, it's about learning to do these things almost at such all times that it just becomes a complete habit. I mean, particularly with something like breath. Breath is such an ever-present part of our realities, our lives, that we take it so much for granted and we often don't pay any attention to it at all. Whereas if you get into a mindful awareness practice whereby you are constantly bringing yourself back to the focus of your breath, then you are constantly bringing yourself back into the centre of your being, rather than being distracted. Because, let's face it, like it or not, our minds are always filled with things. We live in such a busy world and we've been brought up in such ways that our minds have been filled with all this stuff. So I would say that the chief challenge really is to be able to maintain that presence in your own dream, your own reality, rather than being always distracted. And again, I can only kind of repeat, that it's the practice, and through practice and through focusing and keeping centered, that's how you can develop better choice, better decision, and more creativity, and channel your truer reality into the presence of your life, rather than be constantly responding to things. Of course we have to respond to things, but we don't have to spend our entire lives, even if we just spend small parts of our lives in creative focus, then it's amazing how much difference you can make over a long time, because it's about building. It's like when I say this thing about the living energy, living systems strengthen with practice. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about building up our own autonomy, our own independence, our own creative thought, our own stillness, our own now, through through the practice of every time you realise that you're being distracted into something, come back. Every time that you realise that you've been grumpy or thinking in a negative, controlling way, bring yourself back to these things that generate energy, the G's, they generate energy, or generosity, gratitude. And it's not about wearing yourself out serving other people, but it's about building your own energy. In fact, that's what it's about. Well, I'm just thinking that it looks like they might be trying to wind us down here, or maybe they just turned the lights off
Plunged into
because
darkness.
Ambiance.
they don't know we're here. But I know people have got to go in a few minutes, unless there's anything else.
No, that's great. Thanks very much, Claire.
Summed up very well.
Thank you. Certainly giving me something to think about now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
Susanna?
Thank you. Yep.
Oh, sorry.
And we hope to see you on the 21st.
Pointing attention to the fact that certain corporations were evading billions of pounds worth of responsibilities, which could be paying for welfare for the less well off and so forth. But looking back on that, I realise now that it was a time where you were looking at things that had already happened. I can think of a number of occasions in my life where whatever I wanted, it was not of any efficacy because there was already a fait accompli. Right, so we have the world now where the politics is very largely, it's about the people are in control. They have the control of causality. And they hope that the people, the sheeple, will remain in a state of responding, like you can just imagine. The people in Gaza, what can they do? Virtually all they can do is run, you know, if they're lucky. Now, getting out of the frame of mind where you only ever respond to effects is actually quite a difficult task, because we have been programmed all our lives that this is the way things happen, this is the way things happen. I cannot... a fulcrum is a fixed point around a bit which things can move or be levered. And if we think of ourselves as becoming that fixed point, rather than the world outside being the fixed point, then our whole involvement with cause and effect changes. One of the big differences I want to draw attention to is that while the material world works in the ways of Newtonian physics in local action, that's why when we think of a fulcrum, you're thinking about making an effect on the world from some kind of action. But when it comes to the world of consciousness, you have, it's far more like quantum physics, whereby things can be a little bit less deterministic. And what we should remember is that the world that we've been brought up in is a world of control and prediction. You go to school. By the time you're 15, you've been given some sort of careers advice, you're shuffled into some kind of training probably, and even the people who do well, they go on and they find their job in academia or the civil service or less reputable areas such as government. But what's the really important thing is to be able to look at the world in a way where you are not constrained by the prediction and the predictability and the control of the tram lines of your conditioning. And this is where I want to engage with the world of, we are change. We are interested in changing the world. We're interested in changing the politics. We're interested in making people more aware so that the world can change. But so often we just get trapped in the fighting the effects. If you think about going back 3 years ago now, when the political awakening took one big step forward at the time of the Occupy movement, which had its ups and downs and everything, but there was definitely something that was going on there. But I remember when I was involved in it, it was all very well have a prosperous material life, but it's not one which I'm going to advocate, because that kind of reality always has pitfalls and karma some way down the line. What I'm more interested in is looking about how to approach the world in such a way as to make a difference, but through making permanent and positive change within yourself, so that you may recall from the blurb on the page about it, I took the quotation from ancient Greece, from Archimedes. If I had a fulcrum, I could move the world. I don't know if that's a phrase a term that people have heard before. It's quite an important statement in the history of science. And I remember it from when I was about 10, seeing this book about mathematics, and I saw a picture of Archimedes with this lever and a little fulcrum in the world, and it's saying if you had a fulcrum you could move the world. And what is a fulcrum?
Good evening everybody, and welcome to the August We Are Change Leeds meeting, and tonight's topic is how to raise your vibration. So please welcome back Claire, or Cosmic Claire, who's going to give this evening's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for that. In fact, when I was putting the blurb together for this, I decided I would actually change the title slightly to Evolving Your Vibration. To evolve your vibration and thereby to become more effective. Because I think one of the things that we often find in the world is that we try to do certain things, we find certain information, we try to do things, and they never really seem to make much difference to the world that we live in. And we're often left thinking, why is it that some people have big influence on the world and things change and their life progresses, and for others it doesn't? Now, there's one big section of that that I'll bypass completely, which of course is the world of corporate deceit, lies, corruption and exploitation. That is one way to